Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of this podcast, the Authentic Sound Podcast. Of course, I'm sitting here, not here literally, but joined by Stefan, my co-host. And today we are going to talk again about Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Not the previous, but the episode we published 2 weeks ago. We talked about the first movement of the Moonlight Sonata, and we went very much in depth about what the character was. We compared my old recording by now, 2021, I think. We compared that with the one that Valentina Lisitsa played, and she plays there exactly in single beat, and we compared different things. The character of the piece, as I said, but also some technical notation stuff and so on. So if you have missed that episode, you will find it on our usual link on Substack or in your preferred podcast platform. Today, we are going to continue that conversation because there was so much to say about the first movement that we didn't get to the third movement. And so that will be the topic of today, a continuation of that podcast. And we will also make a few remarks. We go back a little bit to that first episode, the first movement. Stefan, that was quite cool as an introduction, right?
Yeah, I have nothing to add.
So shall we just dive?
We can say it like this. You talked so much in the first episode of the Moonlight Sonata that we didn't get to the third movement because we didn't want to make it 3 hours long. So we said spontaneously during the podcast, let's split it in two. And then we came up with another spontaneous idea. And that's what might happen, guys. I mean, let us know if you enjoyed the last version. That's going to be very interesting to see. Because we're going to see if the music at the end of the podcast is going to be an interesting idea. We can do that for this episode as well.
We could do that, yeah. So in that episode on the first movement, which is, of course, we talked also about the title and the nickname of the piece, and we went into details like also kind of philosophical thought, like what does it matter, these nicknames or not? And obviously that nickname Moonlight Sonata is given in the 19th century not by Beethoven, but by contemporaries and they reflected the spirit or the character of the first movement, obviously. And so we had two separate remarks in that episode about the triplets, if you remember well. Then we made a kind of remark that Lisitsa actually slowing down when the melody starts, because you have there the repeated notes, the 16th note, so the 8th note, dotted 8th note 16, and that 16th note is repeated. And if you want to play that a little bit more with singing quality, I would say, then yeah, the tendency is there to give that a little bit more time. She gives it a lot of time. She actually not drags the triplet, but she holds the last note of the 8th note. And we made a remark that actually is not indicated in the score. There's no ritenuto, there is nothing. And I checked Karl Czerny because we're going to use Czerny's description. Karl Czerny, Beethoven student, as many of you definitely will know. And he wrote this pianoforte school in 1838. And in 1846, he added a fourth volume to the 3 existing volumes, in which he also talked extensively about the interpretation, so to say, of Beethoven's works, and more especially with the focus on the piano works. And he says about these triplets, and it's very interesting, let it be well observed, and I'm quoting now, the whole triplet accompaniment must proceed strictly legato and with perfect equality. And it's striking because we talked about that, right, Stefan? How you said like this gives the listener like a tendency, a feeling of continuation, so to say, right?
Yeah, your head adjusts to it, but I think it goes even further, right? Isn't there I remember a quote you talked with me about once, is that actually your heartbeat adjusts to the speed of the music as well. Isn't there such a thing that like your body like acclimatizes to that speed, and if you then move it around and you're not used to that, it actually feels weird and it feels off?
Well, maybe not your heartbeat physically. That would be very unhealthy.
Maybe that's also true for the slow movements. That would be bad.
Yeah, then whole beat should be forbidden, and I would sign that paper right away. If that
the metronome is ticking at the same speed. Don't forget that.
Yeah, true. That's true. But what is actually when you listen to, and again, start from the start. As we mentioned in the previous episode as well, people get used to recordings, and that's like a little bit of a difficulty. I cannot repeat that enough. We are not experiencing this music anymore freshly. That's like gone. We will never be able to do that. that is in your case unique because you very lately came to classical music. But anyways, it's all, especially the Beethoven pieces, the more known pieces. So you are used to a kind of performance practice as well, and that's the thing. So when we talk about like, okay, you have these triplets in the first movement, and you adjust to it as a listener. And of course, my tempo is much slower, but this also has an advantage of you can very easily relate to that rhythm because it's slower. It's like on the human level. And when it goes much faster than you skipping notes, like in the case of the first movement, Lisitsa goes in double the tempo. Of course, that's not Formula One tempo still, because it's still like
it's an adagio sostenuto. Don't forget that.
Yeah, but when she plays it in my, I mean, from my perspective, that sounds like an allegretto, but it's not something that you cannot follow. But you will skip the eighth note triplets and you will go to the quarter notes easily in her performance. And in my performance, you in that tempo, you have the eighth note capacity. You adjust to that. And in modern performances, and you should check, but it's like we think that every performance is unique, but people are actually copying each other way more than they think. So and so you will see with the Moonlight Sonata, that particular issue that we talked about is actually repeated in almost every performance, and rightfully so, because in that tempo you need to do something to just initiate that melody, and especially repeated notes. And so the listener, and many listeners also listening to this podcast, will recognize that feeling that you expect that to happen, and therefore it's not so disturbing anymore. When you readjust a little bit to whole beat, and in whole beat you don't need to do that. And then the benefit of all of that is that you actually get like this rhythmical continuation. Alberto's taking this to another level that I was doing in 2021. He is. I wrote that in the little note that the Kickstarters, the backers of Kickstarter, will get with the Chopin box to thank them, like something new that we introduced. But he has a kind of orchestral quality in his playing, and that means in orchestra you cannot. You cannot do these micro rubato things. The group is too heavy and too slow to respond. An orchestra, of course, responds very quickly, but you cannot go suddenly to another tempo. So orchestra performances are much more rigid in tempo. And so that's the quality you get also with these triplets. And then it's very interesting to listen to what you had to say, but also curious to see and to read what the listeners of this podcast actually think about it. When you are adjusted to the triplets, and Beethoven is giving you the time at the beginning of the Moonlight, like 4 or 5 bars, then once you're used to hear that rhythm, you want that rhythm to continue. And that's actually what Czerny writes, with perfect equality. And so you could say that my performance 2021, again, we evolved. I give also a little bit of emphasis on that repeated note. And now I would say, I'm saying to myself, Wim, why did you do that? It's of course, I'm a child, quote unquote, of my time as well. So you do that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying it's like bad or it's wrong, but it's stepping outside a little bit of this tendency, like just like in modern pop music. Like now that music goes on. The drummer, he's not waiting for the singer. Everybody adjusts to him or her playing the drums.
Yeah,
and it's a little bit that feeling. So, just wanted to go back to that passage in Czerny because it struck my mind. And then the other thing that Czerny is writing about, I depicted like a picture or like a scenery of that Moonlight Sonata. The lake at Moonlight, of course, and at the other side of this lake, you didn't hear a voice, but you heard the spirit, like the ghost, like someone of the other side, like someone you loved or whatever, knew, your friend, family, whatever, that passed away, and then you hear that echo of the voice at the other side of the lake. And I think it was a reminiscence of what Czerny writes, because he writes, this movement is a night scene in which the voice of a complaining spirit is heard at a distance. Double quote. And also, you have to figure out, you have to make up your mind yourself, listening to the two versions, in which of the two performances this image actually, which are the two performances that reflects that image the best. And it's not a discussion. It's not something that we want to impose on you, but it's interesting to take these nicknames and to see like in what version actually comes that through the best. This ghostly. I don't know if I don't find the word in English, like etherical. I don't know if that's the word. Like this thing that is there between life and higher life or heaven or how you want to call it. And there is something that we feel, and maybe it's rotten as nothing. We just feel it. I don't know. I'm not going into discussion that, but you know the feeling. Like it's in this atmosphere that Beethoven wants to bring us. Like it, and yeah, that fits very well, I think, in that tempo. But I'm again talking for 3 hours, Stefan. So you have to interrupt.
It's it's fine. It's what I'm used to. That's why we work so well. I just listen, let you speak. But it's an interesting point you make. And just to be clear to the listeners, this is not a proof that whole beat is the right thing.
No.
You will. The only proof you can say you have that whole beat has to have been a thing is the insane speed of certain metronome marks we have. For example, Czerny's Opus 299 or whatever. You have many examples of insane speeds that we are never going to reach humanly. It's just impossible without discussion. And that's the only proof you have. But what makes these sources interesting is that, yeah, it's contextual evidence, as you like to say. It's like it's a story and you see, does this fit better in my whole beat puzzle or in my single beat puzzle? And therefore you can say, well, it probably fits a little more in this case in the whole beat puzzle than in the single beat puzzle. I mean, of course you can discuss now what an eternal spirit would sound like. Everyone has their own image. This is actually completely irrelevant, but it's interesting to take a look at. And you can always obviously get into discussions about this and that, but that's beyond the point. And probably you remembered that quote in your head. That's why you used the image the last time. So you didn't come up with this, and accidentally it was the same thing in Czerny. I mean, you of course read that. You read that in the Czerny description before. But we actually didn't consciously go back to that quote last time, but you just remembered it and you looked at it and was like, that's exactly the image. And yeah, I can attest to that. It feels like that. It feels like a ghostly spirit that is like mourning from very far away. And yeah,
and also
doesn't feel like someone's singing at the other side of the lake, as I said in the last podcast. That's a different thing. That would sound differently.
Exactly. And last point about this before we go to the last movement, it's like when you try this first movement, everybody can do that actually because it's playable. Then just try to play it, as Czerny says, like with the triplets very equal. So that means you make no compromises whatsoever to the entrance of the melody, not so much anyways. And then you have this very sharp 16th note, and there is a lot of discussion and certainty about this. You have triplets and you have a dotted 8th note 16th and the other voice. So there was not really an agreement on that. What you can say is like in slow movements, you tend to play the 16th note over the triplets, and in fast movements, the 16th note is adjusted to the triplets. It's like kind of a notational thing that comes from the 18th century. But Czerny really clearly says, like in this case, what does he say here? The semiquaver must be struck after the last note of the triplet. So you don't have a choice, I think. I mean, it's Beethoven's student talking here. So closer than this, we don't get to Beethoven. So if you play it like that, so in single beat, quarter note 54, there's also quarter note 60, both by Moscheles and Czerny. Well, then it's the question, if you come to that passage where you have tam, ta-dam, if that really then can fix or can fit actually into the description that Czerny gave. And I doubt that very much, because that gives a rhythm that's like much too bright, much too optimistic, much too strong, much too, like you said, in the forefront.
It's like a march, style, even a little bit, yeah.
And then really the last thing is like, but it's also a tip or a hint that I can give to the listener is, when you listen to both versions, you need to adjust, of course, when you go back to the slow movements. We talked about that, and we will talk about that a lot in all the episodes, because that's one of the main things with whole beat, that when you
it's one of the main problems actually, that you have to go back and then your head has to adjust to the slower speed.
Yeah, exactly. But in this movement, not so much is happening. It's one of those Beethoven high virtuosic exercises. I mean, Beethoven's music, it's about nothing anyways. I mean, Beethoven rarely has a melody, even doesn't have a motive is sometimes the only thing that the entire symphony is built of pieces built on. But here you have actually just an atmosphere. It was quite new in the time to do that. And so there is not so much happening. And this first movement is very popular because of the beginning. But if you play the whole movement, it's for many people a little too long sometimes because really nothing is happening. And then you have to say, you can say, okay, but you're doubling the time, the duration of this first movement compared to Lisitsa. Okay, so it gets even longer and more difficult to sustain or to get your attention to that. And that's the question. That's the question. I mean, I cannot answer that, of course, for you, but just experiment yourself. Listen to that performance of Lisitsa and then listen to my performance, or Alberto's performance will be out in December. We're recording this in October 25. But there's 9 minutes or so, the first movement in my version, with nothing happening. That's like a long piece, right? But it's the atmosphere. Once you are in this atmosphere and you start to dream, you start to sink away in this like unconscious hole. That's what Beethoven really wants. I'm convinced of that. He drags you into this no man's land where there is no motive. There's a little melody, yeah, at very far away, not prominent, and also not in a way like you can feel the end, like the bow and whatever, like an opera aria. No, there is something there whispering from a very far distance. And you have this rhythm and it's ongoing. And you have this like da, ding, da, da. And that for 9 minutes. Then, and we talked about that. When that is over, measure or just analyze your feelings. Analyze your how you feel at that moment. It's like you have been through a journey. And then the 9 minutes are important. Shorter would be too short. You need to pass that point where you constantly are searching for, like, where's the motive? What's now happening? Where's the beautiful climax? There is nothing in this movement. It's nothing. It's just the atmosphere. The atmosphere. It's nothing else. And you have to be immersed in that. And then it works.
Yeah, but that is exactly the intended. What's the word? That's the intended, that emotion that this piece is supposed to evoke. That's Beethoven's intention. There is supposed to be nothing going on, and let's be honest, it's not like nothing. There is what is this piece called? I don't know. It's like 433 or something, where a pianist just sits for 4 minutes and plays no notes. That would be nothing going on. I think there is such a thing. I don't know if it's the right one, but it's not like that much nothing. But you're right. There is not a lot going on, and I remember even jokingly when we wanted to take a look at this episode, and of course we prepare it, and then I asked you, is there a second part of this first movement that we can go to that is interesting? And you said no, there is nothing going on. You just have to take the beginning and have a go. And I mean, if we now go to the third movement, there are more spots that have something different going on. But this first movement, you said it correctly. There is nothing going on, and that's the beauty of it. And people can experience that in your recording. And one more comment that I wanted to make is, and you always said it jokingly, and we listened to it in the last episode, you like give a little bit of this rubato thing in your performance, and Alberto is a lot more strict. So you always jokingly say that the Italian Alberto is a lot more German than you are, and you are more the Italian in this case. So it feels like reversed. I mean, you're not German, you're from Belgium, but that's closer to Germany than Italy, you would say. a little fewer mountains in the way, you could say.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, but we will spend maybe an episode on this, and maybe with Alberto together, like what is his philosophy, and we talked about that, of course, a lot in the approach. And he's, I mean, it's not that I can steer him to a direction. I mean, this guy has a vision, and he's just following that vision. And sometimes we get the chance to talk about that. Let's say it like that. But I mean, he developed this in a way that is really worth one or even more episodes, because his way of playing is something remarkable. And I think that people But as a side remark, it will need to adjust like a few years to his style of playing. Once you are, it's very addictive. So,
Yeah.
Stefan, let's go to the third movement. We talked about like nothing is happening, but Beethoven is about it's making it's something out of nothing. If you have the score, the opening, the beginning. Maybe we can share. We will describe for the people who are listening what we see. By the way, you can also have access to these video podcasts on our Substack page. You will find a link to that, and also on our Patreon page. Not to pitch this, but well, it's pitched anyway. Can you pull up the score, maybe?
Of course. For you, I can do that.
Okay, so if you let's compare this with the piece written by Bach. You know, Bach has a motive and he's working around that motive, and it's being like incredibly ingenious and like complex. And of course, Bach has also pieces that are simpler. But just as a comparison, what is the beginning of this piece? I mean, it's again typical Beethoven. It's just an arpeggio in C sharp minor. I mean,
Yep.
what? And then you think, okay, that's the first two bars. No, then repeat that in like the dominant seventh with the B sharp and the bass. And so he creates again an atmosphere here, other than like let's have a beautiful melody and like do something. He's going to introduce a melody in this piece, and this is not, we turning this episode into a listening guide episode, which we will have in the future, which is also interesting, I think, to go through, and also with Alberto, but that will be for later. But just to say, like, Beethoven is, in that sense, kind of, yeah, he is unique, but also uniquely positioned to bring music to its essence. Like he is describing in musical language a feeling, an atmosphere, a character, something like a mood, if you want. And in that sense, he was really ahead of his time. So just to mention that again, we are going to compare both performances. Lisitsa is actually playing in single beat here. I'm playing according to the slowest metronome mark Czerny gave, 80 for the half note. He gave also 84 and 92, and actually Lisitsa is matching the 92 in single beat. So it's one of those pieces where it is possible. So Stefan, what would you propose how we continue? By listening or more talking?
I think enough talking. You spoke too much again. No, just kidding. I think it's time to listen, and then we will see what comes up. And we're going to do it in the same way we did it last time. We're going to start with your version, so the slower version, and then we're going to go to the fast version, so people experience what it's like to go from slow to fast. And during this journey, we'll also go from fast to slow in other segments. But without further ado, let's start with your version of the Moonlight Sonata, third movement. And now we would have the same thing coming up again.
But first, I would like a description of this piece. What it evokes with you. I mean, what kind of image or mood or feeling or character? Because again, for people listening to this podcast as a first episode, you are a mathematician. In fact, you play the piano, but let's say you are a little bit of an outsider. Came to classical music very late, and so you are very freshly in this music, and also came to my channel and our research from the perspective that much of this music for you was initially like a blur because it was too fast, and so it's very interesting. I think also for the listener, I'm sure for the listener, to hear your take on this performance. What does it do with you?
So in this case, it's interesting. So what you hear with your performance is you hear a lot of articulation. You can distinguish very clearly where the music is going. You hear the 16th notes, and there is, I don't know, it gives me a little bit of a mysterious feeling. But of course, there is always then these forte chords that, like, it's not like mysterious but nothing going on, but it's like it also creates an atmosphere. That's what it feels like to me. It's a different atmosphere than the first movement, but there is something that is created, and you always have then these interruptions, like it's like a mood, and then there is this interruption, like a climax building, and it goes like this, and then suddenly you have like a little bit of a, let's call it maybe a little bit of a melody going on, and then you go back to this, and it feels like, yeah, it feels more like a similar to the first movement. There is a mood setting going on, but what is very clear to me here is you can feel the pulse of the notes moving, and even these 16th notes throughout. So it's not only like a, and we'll hear that in the faster version. It's not like a line, but you can hear very clearly what is going on in with the notes. And one interesting remark, maybe, I mean, this says Presto agitato. So this is probably one of the fastest tempo indications we have.
Mm-hmm. There is still Prestissimo, but that's just the next step.
But it's like very far up, and that's like, is this actually a Presto agitato in terms of feeling? And I have to say, it doesn't really feel like that. And this is not an argument, but I have to say it feels slow if I think of Presto agitato and like one of the fastest speeds we have. Of course, you have the shift of perspective that you can actually still listen to these 16th notes, and that's something that happens a lot of times in these whole beat performances. You can still listen to the smaller parts of the music that are actually going on, so these 16th notes, and yeah. And maybe this is also what shifts the perspective, that you don't listen to longer segments as in faster performances, you listen to the smaller segments, and that gives you maybe back a little bit this Presto feeling. But still, I have to say, this feels slower than I would expect the Presto agitato to be.
Yeah, no, I can totally understand that. And keep in mind, 80 is the slowest tempo that I took. 92 will be like faster. I think Alberto played it in 92. He's following the Haslinger. 1828, 34-ish. Czerny metronomization. So, but we come back to that. And also we come back to that, well, like the tempo choice for this piece when we talk about the cadenza. Made a few years ago a video about this piece. People might still remember that. It was one of the most popular videos still of my channel. But what you say about the 16th note, and you, for the listeners, you didn't read Czerny here on my other screen.
No, I honestly didn't. No.
Yeah, but he says like the whole extremely impetuous, so this movement, and with a powerful, clear, and brilliant touch. Which means brilliant means like it's not a legato touch. It's like this. It's articulated, like it's present, like that. You hear all the notes, and so yeah. Where is the Presto feeling? That's something that I cannot debate upon, because that's a personal thing, and of course you have to go back also in that time when you're used to faster performances. Then it's, of course, you lose something when you go back. You could also say like, yeah, but Presto, definitely Prestissimo, is described as the fastest that a player can do. Yeah, okay, but we have sources from that time, and not one, several, that say, okay, the fastest people can play is actually 10 notes per second. And so I have no idea what you would come up with here in 92 half note, how many notes per second that we will be playing, but it's very close to 10, if not even more. So that's one argument. You could say like, okay, this was the Presto feeling back in the days. This was like as fast as people wanted to have it. If you like this podcast, the beginning of this podcast, and you want to listen to the full episode, go over to Substack. There's a link in the description box. Subscribe to Substack, because then you have the full audio version of this podcast. If you want to have the video version, there's also a possibility on Substack to subscribe for $5 per month, or you can have also the video podcast and support the entire project on our Patreon site. Links to all of these platforms below. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. We see each other very soon again. Bye.